PharmaVentures, experts in deals and alliances.
Hello and welcome to PharmaVentures Insights here at Genesis 2016 in London. On today's show I have Steve Gardner, the CEO of RowAnalytics. Steve, welcome.
Thank you.
So RowAnalytics, perhaps we could start, you could tell us a little bit about your company and what it's doing.
Yeah, we're a complex data analytics business. We try and solve those problems that you can't solve using some of the standard methodologies where you split problems into little chunks and send them to lots of different machines around the place. We deal with things where you have to hold all of the problem in memory at once. And you deal with, probably the most complex system that we know is the human body. Mm-hmm. There are 7 billion of us. We all have different genomes. We all have different phenotypes. We all have different lifestyles. So when you come to the business of trying to decide what medicines will work for you or what foods will work for you, you need something that can deal with that level of complexity. And traditional analytical tools have not been very good at doing that. So that's the kind of system that we aim to build. We do things at a very large scale, and we embrace lots of dimensionality in the data that we deal with.
So historically, pharmaceutical and drug companies would have not really liked what you did because they want everybody to be the same and have one drug and it all works for one person. But I guess the world is changing and that doesn't work, and you've got a role to play in that going forward.
Well, absolutely. They're under a lot of pressure from payers and insurers particularly, who look at the efficacy of drugs on the formulary. And we have situations where, for example, in cancer therapies, on average you have about a 30% efficacy rate. Right. The challenge of that is, of course, all of the 70% of drugs that you're prescribing that don't have an effect, not only costing money and are wasting, but causing wastage, but you also have all of the side effects associated with those treatments, which are they're non-trivial. Mm-hmm. They cause serious economic and social consequences. They have deep impact on patient outcomes, and they cause a lot of serious adverse events because they interact with other medications that those patients may be taking. So, we've come up as an industry with the notion of personalized or precision medicine being the future of this industry. And you're absolutely right. I mean, it's a twofold challenge. One is, if we are reliant on the pharmaceutical industry producing 30 new therapies, which fit 30 different cohorts who have a slight variation of a particular disease, the economic model underpinning that is going to be challenging. Mm-hmm. There's no question about that. So I look at it from two perspectives. One is for those diseases where we don't have a good set of therapies that will that are actually serving the patient community. The technology can offer new opportunities. It can spot new R&D pathways that we can go down. It can help design clinical trials that will actually take a medicine that may only work in 30% of the patient population, but it can find that 30% of the patient population more accurately. So yes, you've got a smaller market, but you've got a much easier way and a much easier to justify way of actually hitting that patient community. So that's one side of things. That's what I actually call the hard way mm-hmm. of doing precision medicine. The easy way is to work within the formulary that we've already got. So take the drugs that we've got and make them work better for the patient in front of the clinician. And here's the second challenge. I mean, it is just incredibly difficult to be a clinician in today's environment. We have more data at our disposal about the person in front of us, the patient in front of us, than we have ever had. We've got next-gen sequencing, we've got deep phenotypic knowledge. We can do blood analysis in an automated fashion in the GP surgery that does 100 different analytes for $30. I mean, it's amazing technology. We've got single molecule detection technology. We've got epigenetics starting to come through in some of the very large scale population studies that we're working on. And that's an amazing opportunity, But on the other hand, if I'm the patient, you're the clinician, you've got 7 minutes to diagnose me and accurately and give me the right medicine and make that medicine work in the context of all my other diseases and medications that I'm taking. There isn't, I'm sorry, clinicians do a fabulous job, but there isn't a human on the planet that can actually do that. We need better tools. So we've got all of this data, and the clinicians are drinking from basically a drinking straw, and there's a tidal wave coming over them. And the bit in the middle, how you take that data and make it actionable, putting the right drug in the patient in front of you every time, that's the bit that we're doing with our clinical decision support tools.
Right.
So we take those kind of complex biomarkers that enable us to predict what disease susceptibilities and therapy responses a patient population is going to have. We analyze them at a population level, and then we can take the models that we generate and deploy them at the point of care on a mobile device that the clinician can use to actually assess the person's risk of having a particular disease, or the responses that they're likely to have to therapy, or indeed any adverse events that are likely to occur from the prescriptions that the set of prescriptions that they're giving. And then it's a decision support tool. It helps the clinician come to a decision about what the best medication should be.
Right.
And that's the kind of arc of what we as a business are delivering. We call it Precision Life.
It's a not insignificant challenge. I mean, the way you've described it is fascinating. Models are only as good as the data that goes into them and the algorithms that uses that data.
Yep.
So you're dependent upon what you put in and what you've measured that goes into the system.
Absolutely.
But how do you decide what's relevant and what's not?
Well, actually, that's kind of the point. We don't know what's relevant and what's not. And the technology that underpins a lot of machine learning and artificial intelligence, which is the basis of most of the systems that get deployed in this space, they tend to take shortcuts. So you define models that work on probabilities, or you have a decision tree and you make certain decisions to prune out choices that you might make. We have a completely different algorithmic basis. Our maths underpinning everything is the same maths that underpins physics. So it is literally logically provable. So the assumptions that we've put into the system, the constraints, the rules, the state of systems, all of that can be verified because we're tying it back to primary literature and primary studies. And we have a big what-if engine. If all this is true, what are the consequences? And we can do that very, very quickly and turn that into a personalized recommendation engine.
Right. So, excuse my naivety, but are you dealing in? You called it a what-if engine. Are you dealing in most likely outcomes, probabilities? This is the most likely thing it is, and that's what you'll deliver to a clinician?
Actually, no. We're basically, we have a very smart filter.
Right.
So what we're doing is excluding possibilities that don't fit given the set of information that's available. So one thing that might not fit are 2 drugs that maybe you've got a patient in front of you who's got 5 different conditions, they're on 10 different drugs, and they've become hypertensive. You now need to give them a blood pressure medication. Which one do you choose? There are dozens to choose from. They work in different ways, they all have different properties. As a clinician, it's incredibly difficult to be able to deconvolute that set of potential interactions. What you need to be able to do is eliminate them because perhaps they interact on the same receptor in the body, and therefore you have a higher chance of causing an interaction. Perhaps you have interactions between the patient's genotype and this particular medication.
Something that the physician may never know.
Yeah, they would never know that. And even if they could remember all of that, that's only the first order interactions that get reported. Of course, if you have, for example, a blood pressure medication, a diuretic, and a particular antibiotic, it's not obvious, but they all act on calcium receptors, and so you get your calcium levels dropping through the floor. And that means, your patient can go into convulsions, even though none of those medications by itself is indicated to have that level of effect.
So this is proactive.
Well, this is a safety. I'd like to think of this as a safety net.
Right.
So, when we come to the clinical decision support side, we're not trying to replace a clinician's judgment. What we're trying to say is, be very careful if, for this patient who's sat in front of you, here are some of the consequences associated with this set of choices that are available to you. So
that was kind of my next question: is do we actually need clinicians if what you're doing works?
In all seriousness, I think the role of clinicians is changing. I think as we're in a world where we have two things going for us, or one thing going for us and one expectation. So we have a very, very strong expectation that the services, the content, the goods that we consume in a society are becoming much more personalised. And it doesn't matter whether it's Amazon, Netflix, Burger King, even your electric or your utilities supply tariffs are becoming personalised, and people are, in that latter case, they're changing every hour to reflect your behaviour. And it's it's an amazing opportunity that's opened up by a more digital world that we're living in. So that's one side of things. The second side of things is that we're becoming much more informed about our own health. And it's Eric Topol with his book "The Patient Will See You Now." Introduces this analogy with the printing press and Gutenberg and the impact on literacy in the Middle Ages, when you went from predominantly religious texts being hand copied to being printed, and therefore much cheaper. And a consequence of that was massive increase in literacy. And we're talking about exactly the same thing, as Topol says. It's a medical literacy, where you have, what we're seeing are motivated patient populations. I do a lot of work with people like Breast Cancer Now and
advocacy groups.
Disease advocacy groups. And you're seeing those disease advocacy groups. They're fantastic. They're motivated. They want to share their data. They are desperate for people to come in and help them improve, not just, new therapies, discovery of new drugs, but actually tools to help them manage their day-to-day lives and manage their risk of moving from this at-risk group into a full-blown disease state and staying as healthy as they can for as long as they can. And that's just a reflection. I mean, you see the same sort of trend in the baby boomer generation, who are moving from having been very, very fit and having an expectation of health to a point in their lives where things are starting to go wrong. But they don't like that.
I'm noticing it.
Yeah, well, let's hope nothing's dropped off yet. But you're basically trying to maintain as optimal a health for you as you can, given your particular set of circumstances. And I think you're seeing that starting to permeate through society. We're realizing that, even in a social healthcare system, we can't rely on the NHS being there to fix us all the time. So we can't keep getting sick and turning up at the doctor and expecting the doctor to fix us. We have to take some responsibility for that. And as a society, that means we have to become more engaged, we have to become more informed and more educated. And if we do all of those things, we'll actually become proper partners in the management of our health, which is great from a social healthcare system, or indeed even an insurance healthcare system, because you've got people not turning up at clinics don't cost the health system very much.
Indeed.
It becomes more affordable.
Yeah.
So I think this trend has, it has social aspects to it. It has massive economic aspects to it as well. I think it's this is where medicine will go in the next 20 years.
Right. So from what you've described, it sounds like you're the payer's ultimate friend, but who are your real customers?
So there's a variety of different customers on the discovery of new associations. So if you take all of the genome studies that are being done on tens or even hundreds of thousands of patients, what we're finding is that diseases are actually much more complex than we've ever been able to analyze before. So, for example, we're doing a big study in breast cancer at the moment, and the current state of the art is to identify maybe a couple of SNPs, mutations, in combination that are associated with a disease. So you can think of Angelina Jolie turning up having had a BRCA1 test. Given a pretty poor prognosis for developing the disease, and electing to have a mastectomy.
Yeah.
And the sad thing is that on the basis of that, lots of people got tested, felt that because they had BRCA mutations, they should go and have that same operation. And actually, we're now understanding that we're probably doing too many mastectomies, and that the outcomes for that group are not as good as they should be. So what we've been doing is looking at that mutant population. We've now got to the point where we're looking at 17 mutations in combination that are associated with disease risk or disease protective effect. So yeah, BRCA1 and BRCA2 might be mutated, but the other 15 genes, the mutations in those are actually protecting against the disease risk rather than causing concern. And that means that we can now individualize much more accurately the advice that we give to those women coming through, or indeed the men coming through, because men get breast cancer as well. So I think this is the way that medicine will go, and it's not, for those diseases, that's fine. Breast cancer is highly heritable. Other diseases, you need to bring in clinical, phenotypic, epigenetic data. I will work in motor neurone disease as well. There's a very big project going on at the moment called Project Mine, where 22,500 patients and controls are being sequenced. But they also have all of their clinical, phenotypic and epigenetic data. But up until now, we just haven't been able to combine all of that data and analyze that data to find the patterns that really truly are associated with disease, and some that are associated with maybe a slower progression or maybe a protective effect. And that's where we start with that, with that piece of it. So the customers for that are the biopharma companies. You can take that, you can apply it to a patient population, find who's likely to respond. That helps you define best clinical practice. So that's the HMOs, the insurers, the service providers. You can use it to design clinical trials. So that's the CROs and the biopharma companies. And you can also use it at the point of care. So you can take, as I said, you can take those personalized recommendations and use them in the clinic. And again, that's down to health systems.
Right.
But you can also go one step further. So you can take that into tools that people can use in their day-to-day lives. So one of the other things that we've done to demonstrate the efficacy of this approach is to start to look at what food interactions there are with diseases and drugs. So you've got, so we have a tool called Healthy Swaps, which basically lets us, even for very complex patients who are on multiple drugs, you can go in and you can literally take an online shopping basket with a bunch of foods and say, just give them a traffic light display of which one for them is likely, good, bad or ugly.
Yeah. So right down to that sort of basic level of people everyday shopping and doing what they're doing.
Literally, you can barcode scan a can of beans if you like, and
it says no.
Yeah. Well, if it's Marmite in my household, it says no. If I get to it first, if my wife gets to it, then it says yes.
So where are you in the development of this? What stage are you at?
So we've spent some of the technology goes back about 20 years. And we've been developing that. It's been used previously in the nuclear safety industry and in railroad design and in electronic product development. We've applied it in in the health and life sciences space. And we've really got to a point of being able to work on very large data sets, and we're literally writing the papers with a view to going live in 2017.
Well, this is fascinating.
Breaking news.
Fascinating time to get to talk to you, Steve.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for giving us a window into a very different world and a different approach to better medicine.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure talking to you. Thank you.
It's been a pleasure.
PharmaVentures, experts in deals and alliances.